The journey to net zero is one of the biggest challenges humanity has ever faced. As temperatures keep rising, the devastating effects of climate change are becoming more severe. In this new series of Leaders with Lacqua Goes Green, we go beyond the headlines and speak to the people who are confronting the climate crisis through their work to learn how they're positioning for the future. I begin with the man in charge of the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. Valued at almost $1.6 trillion, Norges Bank Investment Management is the biggest owner of stocks globally, with stakes in almost 9,000 companies. It was established to invest Norway's vast fossil fuel riches. But as the energy transition gains momentum, it sought to reduce exposure to oil and gas. Instead of divesting, its strategy is to apply pressure from within. Nicolai Tangen has been at the top of finance for over 3 decades, but his toughest test may lie ahead. Thank you so much for joining us on Leaders with Lacqua Goes Green. So what does it take to be a leader in 2024?
I think what it takes is more emphasis on empathy. And in a world which is leaning towards whether it's more machines, more AI, we need to lean more towards what is it that makes us human. So that whole thing is more important than ever before. But
the world is so complex at the moment. How do you distinguish the noise from the facts?
Well, that is also more important than ever before. It's to make that distinction and to just establish the facts, talk to people, and just exclude all the noise, all the social media, all these kind of things.
I mean, you're a leader almost like no other because you lead the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. You want to explain to everyone that's interested in what the fund does, and you also have a podcast, you do investments. Like, what kind of leader do you think you are?
I think I am a very including leader, and the good thing about leading the people in the fund is that they are just so smart and so clever. And so they don't need much leadership. They just need a bit of direction, and then they figure it out themselves.
But you've done quite a lot since joining the fund, and that was during the pandemic. Yeah. How do you see the fund changing?
It's interesting, but in some ways it's easier to make changes during a period like the pandemic because people are at home and they are spread out. And so when you suggest some things, it's perhaps easier to get them to do the new thing.
I don't believe that for 1 second. It's always hard. I mean, if it's hard to change culture, it's hard to change people.
Well, you have to explain why you do it, and I think make even more sure than before that people have a true purpose. And so you have to distill down what is the purpose of what you do, what is the purpose of your company, and make that very clear, and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And it's very clear what our purpose is to make money for the Norwegian population.
So why did you accept the job? You had a great life. I mean, you had a hedge fund that was doing very well. You were earning lots of money.
Well, I had a great life. I had a great life, but I still have a great life, and a really good life. No, I was very keen on that job because one, I think it's one of the most important positions in asset management. Right, I love asset management. In terms of the opportunity to develop that organization further, there were great opportunities, and I love organizational development. And then to do something nice for the country. I mean, these 3 things came together in the same job.
Why do you love asset management? Because you can influence and change the future, or is it being cleverer than anyone else?
Asset management is the most interesting job in the world, perhaps after being a journalist. Why is that? Well, everything you eat, drink, drive, all these kind of things is made by a company. You need to understand psychology in terms of the companies. You need to understand the corporate culture of companies. And then these things change all the time, right? You have the macroeconomies changing, interest rates are changing, currencies are changing. And the data points are just changing all the time. You just couldn't invent a more fascinating game, even if you tried.
But it's harder now. I think it feels like things are changing faster, right? Inflation forecast, rate forecasts, our economy.
It's changing very fast. So on the one hand, that means that you need to be very observant and agile. At the same time, I think there is even more scope if you manage to be contrarian in what you do, and if you manage to be long-term. I think that's where the money is. The big arbitrage now is to be contrarian and long-term.
What do you think markets are getting wrong right now?
Well, it's a bit kind of arrogant to say that the market is wrong, because what is the market? The market is the total IQ of all the people in the world, right? So that's a tough one. I do think that inflation will be tough to get down. There is more nearshoring. We are seeing some. We have recently seen some more pressure on raw materials. Wage increases are quite high. So I suspect that we won't see the type of rate cuts that many people expect.
What do you see? I mean, there's this US exceptionalism, which is what we're seeing in the US economy, the inflation data, what the Fed does. What have we gotten wrong on the US economy?
Well, the US economy is actually pretty good, certainly relative to Europe, right? And we see it as well. When I see US CEOs, they are just seeing the backdrop for doing business in America is so much better than doing business in Europe. So a lot of things are going right in America.
How much time do you spend looking at what the Fed does or what the economy does, and how much time do you spend understanding your companies and thinking about what themes you need to be invested in?
No, I think they kind of go together. I think you understand the economy through the companies. So my job in a way is to speak to companies and try to create this kind of mosaic of information.
What do you see as the biggest change for our economies? Is it AI, which is being priced in, or is it geopolitics?
I don't think you can differentiate AI from geopolitics anymore. They are so deeply intertwined, because AI is now an important part of weapon systems, of healthcare research, of car technology, EV technology. So they just go together. So it's a new thing. Now, microchips is also an important part of the geopolitics. It wasn't to the same extent before. So all these things are just much more complicated than they have been.
You're tantalized, right, by this exciting change when many people are actually really worried about what's coming.
Well, I think the world has never been more exciting, right? What's happening in AI is leading to some tremendous change, leading to some huge progress. For instance, in the way we do research in and R&D in the pharma industry, it's improving the weather forecast. It's improving a lot of things, right? It's just a tremendous increase in compute power. So generally, it's a positive thing.
Are you mainly positive, or do you also worry about
No, I think it's mainly. It's mainly positive, and then the question, of course, is how do you regulate this? I think it's going to be very tough to regulate, because it's so embedded into kind of the competitive landscape between the superpowers.
What does it mean for your investments in AI? You don't choose 100% where you invest, because you have a framework, by the government. But how do you see the adoption of AI going forward?
We are seeing the adoption. We see fast adoption, and it's also interesting what are the implications for productivity. So on the podcast I asked Sam Altman, what kind of productivity growth should we see in our company over the next 12 months, and he thought we should see 20%, right? So I walk around in the office and say, hey, how are you going to become 20% more efficient? What exactly are you doing? And I think we all need to ask ourselves about that. How are you doing it? I was just asking you first.
So for me, maybe I can have multiple language skills.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is something that actually you were mentioning. You have this podcast, which I know you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Why do you enjoy it so much?
Oh my, so we started the podcast in order to give the Norwegian population insight into the type of companies they own, right? And it's basically, we just learn a lot. We learn a lot, which is relevant for students who listen to the podcast, business leaders, we ourselves, it's important. And you have the ability to talk to the people who actually kind of lead the world. It's fascinating, right? And also, I need to read up on all these industries, so that's what I do during the weekends. Many of them have written books. I have to read the books. You have to gain insight into various industries. It's fantastic for learning.
Who's the toughest interview you've done?
Well, we had a pretty tough one with Elon Musk, because we had some technical issues, and of course that you need to kind of keep concentration whilst you have some technical issues. That's not so easy. But I think they're all very good. I mean, these are great people, and it's fascinating to talk to them.
You're a big investor in Tesla. Do you get into the nitty-gritty of actually what a company does, what they're promising, to see whether your investment continues? Well,
I don't really do that kind of nitty-gritty, like how many cars are you going to sell, how many of them are red, how many of them are blue, that kind of stuff. I just don't think that's necessarily important for the long-term success of the company. But so where I spend time is on the business model, try to understand where they make money and why they should continue to do well in the future. Spend a lot of time on corporate culture, leadership. I think corporate culture is completely underrated. It's just underestimated. because you can have two companies which do exactly the same, or at least that's what it looks like on the surface. One is hugely successful, one is a complete failure. What is it? There is just something in the company and the way they conduct business, which is so important.
Coming up, Nicolai Tangen on why the world has stumbled on the path to a greener future. The commitment of oil and gas companies is crucial to achieving net zero. The industry supplies more than half of the world's energy and is one of the planet's biggest polluters. Oil majors have vowed to cut production and slash emissions. But recently, after record-breaking profits, some have walked back on those pledges, despite pressure from institutional investors like Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund. I continue the conversation with Nicolai Tangen. You've been one of the most committed to climate change and to ESG matters. Are we taking a back step as a world?
Yes, we have done, unfortunately. Very unfortunate. But yes, the world has taken a step back. And I guess we are one of the few big investors out there now who continue to be consistent and who continue to talk about these things the way we have done all the time. But many people have kind of turned on the volume on that messaging.
Why have we taken a step back?
Well, I think on the back of higher energy prices, the energy sector got more confidence. There was more focus on energy security, and that's kind of what started it, right? And then you have had some political movements as well, which have moved in the same direction.
Nicolai, when you look on some of your investments, how difficult is it to take a company, a big company, an oil major, and change it from within as an investor? And therefore, how difficult is it to decide to stay invested in that company?
Well, it's an important question because you can do two things if a company doesn't quite do what you think they should be doing. You can sell it, or you can continue to have a dialogue with them and try to get them to change tack, right? Now, what do you achieve if you sell it? You basically end up with a company which is owned by investors who don't care. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So therefore, we continue to have a dialogue with these companies, show understanding, and remain invested whilst they are in that transition period.
Where do you feel you've made a difference, and where have you been disappointed?
I think we made a difference many places. Now, I wouldn't say we have revolutionized the oil and gas industry, but we have been, I think we've been supportive and helpful in many cases, and that's also what we hear back from the companies.
When you look at, I think you have a commitment to make all your portfolio net zero by 2050. Is that achievable?
It's certainly a goal we have, yeah.
Why are you so committed to climate change in 2024?
Because there are two things which is important. One is to not let small problems become big, but it's also important not to let big problems become small. Now, the climate situation we are in is clearly a very, very big problem. We had the hottest year on record last year. It started to have impact in many, many different ways. You see it in the reinsurance prices. You see it in a lot of, worse harvests. It's leading, in some cases, to increased immigration. So it's impacting the world in very many different ways. Now, at the end of the day, this is actually a financial risk because it's a risk to the value of the fund. And if you're invested across the world and one company pollutes, you can't hide, right? Because you capture that pollution in all the other companies you own. So it's very, very important that the main shareholders engage in this.
Do you worry that actually, investors don't engage with some of these companies anymore? I know you also have an ethics, basically, committee, the Ethics Council, that tells you whether you can invest, which is independent but gives you advice, or actually forces you to either sell investments or not invest in companies that are not ethical. How does that relationship work?
No, it works really well. So this is a separate Council of Ethics. They have various criteria they look at. For instance, human rights criteria, coal criteria, nuclear weapon criteria, and then they would go into deep research with various companies to see whether they breach the criteria, and if they do, they would advise us to exit.
And has that happened?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
On climate change?
On climate change, we do exclude some companies ourselves.
Yeah.
And it can be various parts of that. It can be, that could be, for instance, how people use water resources and so on.
I think you're also invested in like physical assets, like not wind shore, but renewables. What makes more sense for an investor like yourselves, being a shareholder or actually owning the parks?
I think you can do both. You know, we do both. We own some of the companies who are involved in these projects, but we also own particular projects. Not that many, because it recently came into our mandate. So we've done it, and then also in the beginning, the returns weren't that attractive. We think the returns are better now, and so we have accelerated that activity.
And this is better. Are the returns better in Europe because there's more regulation to push towards green energy, or actually does the Inflation Reduction Act means that there's going to be more onshoring and more appeal for green technology in the US?
I think what we've seen is that the Inflation Reduction Act has made many of the investments in the US more attractive than what the score is in Europe. Yeah.
And will that change with the China? I mean, China's also doing a lot of EVs. So when you look at all of this competition across the energy sectors, where do you think you'll be invested in 5-6 years from now? Well,
it's difficult to say, and also we don't know whether the Inflation Reduction Act will remain, or whether it's going to be renewed, or whether it's going to be changed. So I don't think we really know that. But for the time being, in the US looks pretty good.
How do you see the U.S. political cycle?
And the rest? We have no view on that. We are a very long-term investor, and we remain invested throughout political cycles.
But does this year, I think 4.5 billion people go to vote?
Yeah.
Does that test AI, or does that test your investment strategy?
I don't think it tests our investment strategy, because we generally are invested over these type of cycles. I don't think you can kind of change your portfolio according to where the election is. Yeah. And also, markets are pretty sophisticated, right? So they are basically discounting, the current probability of the various elections we are seeing. It is questioning the use of AI in social media, for sure. We are seeing that in many places.
Does it matter to you being the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world? Does it give you more access, for example, and political clout to invest in places?
No, we would not have political clout. It's very important that the fund remains not political, and so we are very, very careful steering that balance.
But do you see it as a force for good?
I wouldn't say the fund is a force for good, but we are trying to care about the important things when it comes to future returns for the fund.
Coming up, Nicolai Tangen on his love for learning and why combining knowledge is key to innovation. Nicolai Tangen has been in charge of Norway's sovereign wealth fund since 2020. But the former hedge fund manager turned podcast host and philanthropist has other passions. Tangen owns the biggest private collection of Nordic modernist art, and even took a career break to study art history. I continue the conversation. You love also going back to school and learning about leadership. What
Sure.
drives you?
I just love learning, right? I think we just need to learn. Otherwise, what's the point?
So you'd go back to school?
I've been back to school a few times. I did a degree when I was 36 in art history. I did one in social psychology when I was 50. I'd love to go back to school.
What would you study this time?
Well, there's so many cool things. I think anthropology would be quite fun. It'd be fun to study music. So many things.
What do you worry about, though? I mean, you seem very optimistic by nature.
Yeah.
You love your job.
Yeah.
But it also feels like the world is being tested.
Yeah.
What do people need to study today to make sure that whatever comes our way, we take the right decision?
I think in my mind, the more different type of things you know, the better it is. I personally value, I'd rather have several master degrees than one PhD, for instance, because I think the way you combine knowledge, that's how you create innovation, that's how you create new solutions. I think that's really interesting. The more different type of these type of languages, the more you can communicate with various types of people in the organization, and I think it's really valuable.
Because of what that makes you understand investment better, because everything's connected,
Yeah.
or it's just enriching your mind?
No, I think you understand the world much better.
Is there an investor you admire?
There are many good investors out there. There are many good investors out there. I think the more long-term you are and the more your ability to take contrarian investments, the better you are and the better returns you'll have.
Is it more difficult now to make long-term investments just because of everything that's being thrown at us? I mean, can you say with certainty that you know what our world looks like in 10 years?
No, of course not. I haven't got a clue. I don't even know what the world is going to look like tomorrow. So it is
sunny.
So it is difficult to be a long-term investor. It's difficult because for two reasons. Everything moves faster, right?
Yeah.
So we basically talk and walk 10% faster than we did 30 years ago. It's incredible, right? So everything we do is moving faster. And sometimes the most difficult thing is not to do anything, okay? So to be long-term means that there are periods where you don't do anything. So you come home from work and it's just like, hey, what did you do today? I did nothing. Tuesday, I did nothing. Wednesday, I did nothing. You have to, your partner is going to start to wonder by Friday, what are you actually doing at work, right? So it's very complicated not to do something. And also incentive structures also they are also often encouraging people to do something. So, but the more you can live in your own world, make your own decisions, independent of what other people think, the better they will be, I think.
I think everyone's talking about real estate at the moment, how it's going to crash. Again, how do you deal with, if not the hysteria, certainly a lot of market whispers about things going wrong? Yeah,
it's a complicated issue. We have big real estate holdings in many of the main cities in the world. We got nearly 1,000 investments in places like New York and Washington and Boston and so on, London, Paris. Now we probably adjusted the values down by a quarter at least, and whether they will continue down is difficult to say. It depends on interest rates. It depends on various factors. So you get interest rates right longer term, and your portfolio, of course, is in a much better place. Is that what you try and understand and focus on every day? I think where rates are going it's very important in terms of understanding where the returns will come. I think one of the questions you probably get asked the most is how do you build a good team around you? Is that also the most difficult question to answer? No, I think that's pretty straightforward. You hire the best people you can get. You hire people who are better than yourself. You hire people who have integrity and who are long-term thinkers, who don't jump jobs, but who've shown that they are loyal and can stay in a job for at least 5 years. And then when you have clever people, you don't need to particularly manage them. You just figure out where you're going and you go there together. And you make sure you have some fun. But so what's your so if you don't have to manage them, what's your kind of raison d'etre? You're there to steer, to inspire. You have to kind of figure out what the direction you should go in, right? And encourage them, give them praise when they do good things, and make sure they thrive. Make sure they are in the right position. I have seen people who have been miserable, and then you change their job, and then they flourish, and they thrive, and they love it. And that's, in a way, one of the most fulfilling things you can do as a manager, I think. Okay, where will you be in 3 years? I don't know. Where would you like to be in 3 years? My current job, has a time limit, and to extend beyond that, they would need to ask me, right? And then so that would need to be an agreement that we get to together. But you'd like to stay? I have no official view on this. Thank you so much for joining us. I like that. It's very CIA. I can neither deny nor confirm. Thank you, Nicolai. Thank you. Thank you so much.